Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters, and welcome back to the Islamic SHAHADA channel. Sweden is often imagined through its quiet forests, long winters, and ideals of equality and social democracy. To the world, it symbolizes neutrality, humanitarian values, and openness. Yet beneath this image lies a more complex reality, one shaped by the presence of Islam and the country's struggle to balance free expression with the fight against hate and discrimination. The story of Islam in Sweden spans decades of migration. Turkish workers in the 1960s, Bosnian refugees in the 1990s, Iraqi and Somali families in the early 2000s, and Syrians after the Civil War have all made Sweden home. Their children and grandchildren now walk the streets of Stockholm, Malmö, and Gothenburg, embodying identities that are both Swedish and Muslim. This presence is visible in mosques and cultural centers that serve not just as places of worship, but as hubs of community and integration. Yet their growth has also sparked debates about culture, secularism, and belonging. Sweden's engagement with Islam extends beyond its borders. In 2014, it became the first EU country to recognize Palestine as a state, a move hailed by some as moral leadership and criticized by others as diplomatic risk. The decision linked Sweden's domestic debates with global struggles over justice and sovereignty. But tensions remain. Quran burnings, defended by some as free speech and condemned by others as hate, turned Sweden into a stage for global controversy. These events force the nation to confront hard questions. Where does freedom of expression end? What responsibilities come with it? And how can a country known for tolerance respond to growing intolerance within its own borders? Islam's presence in Sweden is older than it appears. Early contacts go back to the Viking Age, when Arabic coins and artifacts found in Swedish soil showed trade links with the Muslim world. But Islam as a lived religion in Sweden only began in the 20th century. In the 1950s and 1960s, labor shortages brought Turkish workers who laid the foundation for Sweden's first Muslim communities. The 1970s and 1980s saw larger migration flows, driven by conflicts in the Middle East, Iran's revolution, and Somalia's civil war. The Balkan Wars of the 1990s brought thousands of Bosnian Muslims, while later conflicts in Afghanistan, Iraq, and especially Syria during the 2015 refugee crisis made Sweden one of the most significant destinations for Muslim asylum seekers in Europe. Today, Muslims are estimated to make up 8 to 10% of Sweden's population, around 1 million people. They form one of the most diverse Muslim communities in Europe, including Sunnis, Shias, and people from Turkey, Iraq, Somalia, Iran, Bosnia, and Syria. Major cities like Stockholm, Göteborg, and Malmö host large Muslim populations, with mosques and cultural centers acting as focal points for community life. Second and third generations now face the challenge of balancing Swedish identity with religious and cultural heritage. While Islamophobia and debates on migration remain part of public discourse, Swedish Muslims contribute significantly to society in politics, medicine, business, arts, and sports. Islam in Sweden is no longer a temporary phenomenon. It is part of the country's modern social fabric. On October 30th, 2014, Sweden became the first European Union member state to officially recognize Palestine as an independent nation. The decision, made under the Social Democrat Green Party government, was justified on the grounds that Palestine met the core criteria for statehood under international law: a population, a defined territory, and governing institutions. For Sweden, it was both a principled move and a diplomatic calculation, an effort to strengthen the two-state solution at a time when peace talks were paralyzed. Internationally, the recognition boosted Sweden's image as a defender of human rights and moral diplomacy. It earned praise from the Palestinian Authority and much of the Arab and Muslim world, enhancing Sweden's standing as a credible partner in the Middle East. Domestically, it resonated with Sweden's sizable Muslim population and reinforced the country's humanitarian reputation. But the move also provoked sharp criticism. Israel denounced the decision as premature and counterproductive, recalling its ambassador from Stockholm. Several Western allies warned that unilateral recognition risked complicating peace negotiations. Critics argued that the act, while symbolic, had little impact on the realities of occupation, settlement growth, and political division. Even so, Sweden stood by its decision, framing it as part of a consistent foreign policy tradition, supporting justice, self-determination, and adherence to international law. The recognition echoed Sweden's earlier positions against apartheid South Africa and its advocacy for disarmament and conflict mediation. Nearly a decade later, the decision remains a defining feature of Sweden's foreign policy identity. It strengthened ties with Arab states, strained relations with Israel, and demonstrated how a small Nordic country could shape global debate through moral leadership. Whether seen as visionary or naive, Sweden's recognition of Palestine marked a turning point, anchoring its role as one of Europe's most outspoken voices on justice in the Middle East. One of the biggest challenges in understanding Islam in Sweden is the lack of official religious statistics. Unlike some countries, Sweden does not collect data on religious affiliation in its national census, as this is considered a matter of personal privacy. As a result, the size of the Muslim population can only be estimated. Most academic studies and demographic research suggest that Muslims make up between 8 and 12% of Sweden's total population, somewhere between 850,000 and 1.2 million people, depending on the definition used. The variation lies in whether the count includes only those formally affiliated with Islamic organizations, or also second- and third-generation descendants of Muslim immigrants who may identify culturally but not actively practice the faith. What is clear, however, is that Islam is now the second-largest religion in Sweden after Christianity. The community is extraordinarily diverse. Somalis, Syrians, Iraqis, Turks, Bosnians, Iranians, Afghans, and Kurds represent some of the largest groups. Each wave of migration has left its mark, creating a Muslim population that mirrors the broader Muslim world in miniature, encompassing Sunnis, Shias, secular Muslims, and those with varying degrees of religious observance. This internal diversity means that there is no single Muslim experience in Sweden. Instead, there are multiple identities shaped by origin, language, culture, and generational change. Geographically, Muslims in Sweden are concentrated in urban areas where immigrant populations have historically settled. Stockholm, the capital, is home to the largest number of Muslims, with established mosques, Islamic schools, and cultural centers serving as hubs for community life. Malmö, often referred to as Sweden's most multicultural city, has one of the highest proportions of Muslim residents, influenced by waves of migration from the Middle East and the Balkans. Göteborg also hosts a vibrant Muslim presence, alongside smaller but visible communities in towns like Uppsala, Örebro, and Linköping. In many suburban areas around major cities, such as Rinkeby and Tensta in Stockholm or Rosengård in Malmö, Muslims form a significant share of the local population. This distribution has created both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, the growth of Muslim communities has led to the establishment of mosques, prayer halls, halal food stores, and cultural centers, meeting essential religious and social needs. Some of Sweden's largest mosques, such as the Stockholm Mosque, the Malmö Islamic Center, and the Uppsala Mosque, symbolize permanence and visibility. On the other hand, the concentration of Muslim populations in certain suburbs has fueled debates about integration, segregation, and socioeconomic inequality, issues that are often politicized in Swedish public discourse. Religious infrastructure continues to expand. Mosques function not only as places of worship, but also as educational institutions, social spaces, and bridges for intercultural dialogue. Islamic schools provide faith-based education alongside the national curriculum, while community centers offer language classes, youth activities, and support for refugees. At the same time, limited resources and occasional political opposition mean that the demand for more religious facilities often outpaces what is available. By 2025, Sweden's Muslim population has become an inseparable part of its urban fabric. From the bustling streets of Malmö to the multicultural suburbs of Stockholm, Islam is visible in daily life, whether through the call to prayer, the presence of halal restaurants, or the celebration of Eid in public spaces. The community's growth and diversity illustrate both the promise and the challenge of modern multicultural Sweden, a society negotiating how to remain open, inclusive, and equal while addressing the realities of rapid demographic change. The growth of Muslim religious life in Sweden over the past few decades has been striking. In the early years of migration, communities relied on modest spaces, rented community halls, basements, converted shops or private homes, adapted to serve as makeshift prayer rooms. These humble beginnings reflected both the limited resources of early migrant groups and their determination to preserve faith in a new environment. Over time, as communities stabilized and funding improved, purpose-built mosques began to appear across the country. Today, Sweden is home to more than 200 prayer spaces and mosques, ranging from small neighborhood facilities to striking landmarks such as the Stockholm Mosque, the Malmö Islamic Center, and the Gothenburg Mosque, each symbolizing permanence and visibility in the Swedish religious landscape. These mosques serve functions far beyond the 5 daily prayers. They are community hubs where education, social services, and cultural life intersect. Many mosques operate weekend schools or madrasas, where children learn Arabic, study the Quran, and engage with Islamic ethics alongside their public school education. During Ramadan, mosques host large iftar gatherings that bring together not only Muslims, but often non-Muslim neighbors, turning fasting into a communal experience of dialogue and hospitality. Mosques also serve as points of support for new arrivals, offering translation services, legal guidance for asylum and immigration cases, and practical assistance in navigating Swedish society. Everyday religious practice among Muslims in Sweden is diverse, reflecting the community's wide range of backgrounds. Some Muslims maintain strict observance of prayer, fasting, and dietary rules, while others identify culturally with Islam but engage less actively in ritual practice. For many, the rhythm of life shifts during Ramadan, when fasting and nightly prayers known as Tarawih become central. Eid celebrations, both Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha, have grown in visibility in public life, celebrated in city squares, parks, and schools, reflecting Islam's integration into Sweden's multicultural calendar. Yet the experience of faith in Sweden is not without challenges. One of the most visible expressions of Islam, the hijab, remains the subject of debate. For many Muslim women, wearing the headscarf is a matter of personal conviction and identity, but it often sparks discussions in the media about gender, integration, and secularism. Young Muslims in particular face a delicate balancing act, navigating between family expectations, religious tradition, and Swedish social norms. Questions of intercultural marriage, participation in mixed-gender educational settings, or observance of dietary laws in schools are part of the everyday negotiations of identity. Generational differences add another layer. The first generation of migrants often emphasized preservation of cultural and religious traditions, while their children and grandchildren born and raised in Sweden are more accustomed to blending dual identities. For many young Muslims, being Swedish and being Muslim are not contradictory but complementary, though public discourse sometimes challenges this notion. They are increasingly articulate about their place in society, using social media, student associations, and interfaith dialogue to express a confident hybrid identity. At the same time, Islam in Sweden is also shaped by broader debates on secularism and the role of religion in public life. Sweden is often described as one of the most secular countries in the world, with church attendance low even among Christians. Against this backdrop, visible expressions of Muslim faith, whether the construction of minarets, the call to prayer, or faith-based schooling, can become politically charged issues. Yet despite these debates, the daily reality is one of adaptation. Muslims continue to build institutions, practice their faith, and contribute to the evolving religious pluralism of Swedish society. In this way, Muslim places of worship and everyday practices are not only about religion, they are about belonging, continuity, and integration. From basement prayer rooms to modern mosques, from fasting in long Scandinavian summer days to celebrating Eid in Swedish cities, Islam has become woven into the everyday life of the country. In recent years, one of the most polarizing debates in Sweden has revolved around the tension between freedom of expression and respect for religious belief. Sweden is globally recognized for its strong commitment to liberal democratic values, with some of the world's broadest protections for free speech. Yet, this very openness has also created friction when it intersects with acts of deliberate provocation, particularly involving the desecration of Islam's holy book, the Quran. The first major figure to capture public attention was Salwan Najem, who in 2023 was prosecuted in the Stockholm District Court. Najem staged multiple Quran-burning incidents while simultaneously making derogatory remarks about Muslims. His actions were not prosecuted as blasphemy. Sweden abolished blasphemy laws decades ago, but rather under charges of agitation against an ethnic or national group. The court ruled that his actions crossed the line from political expression into deliberate incitement against a religious community. While he did not receive prison time, Najem was handed a suspended sentence and fined, setting a legal precedent that desecration could, under specific circumstances, fall within hate crime legislation. Another name that soon dominated Swedish and international headlines was Salwan Momika, an Iraqi-born refugee who organized repeated Quran-burning demonstrations in Stockholm, often in front of mosques or near public institutions. His protests, though legally permitted under Sweden's broad free speech protections, provoked an enormous diplomatic backlash. In July 2023, after one of Momika's demonstrations, governments across the Middle East, including Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, issued strong condemnations. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, formally called on Sweden to take stronger measures against what it termed Islamophobic hate speech. Swedish embassies abroad became the focus of protests, and Sweden's image as a neutral humanitarian state suffered significant damage. Domestically, Momika became a deeply polarizing figure. To some, he represented the abuse of freedom of expression to insult a vulnerable minority. To others, he was exercising a democratic right that Sweden could not compromise on, even under international pressure. His story took a dramatic and violent turn on January 29, 2025, when he was shot dead in the town of Södertälje, just hours before a court verdict was to be delivered in his case. The murder sent shockwaves across Sweden. Some viewed it as a direct consequence of rising social tensions fueled by religious provocations, while others warned that the killing itself could further inflame divisions. The court proceedings against him became irrelevant, but the wider debate about free speech, blasphemy, and minority rights intensified. Sweden also faced recurring controversies with Rasmus Paludan, a far-right Danish-Swedish lawyer and activist. Paludan gained notoriety in Denmark for his anti-Islam party, Stram Kurs, Hard Line, and brought his protests across the border into Sweden. His Quran burnings in Malmö and other cities sparked riots and violent clashes, particularly in April 2022, when counter-protests escalated into large-scale unrest. By November 2024, Paludan himself faced the legal consequences of his actions. A Malmö court sentenced him to 4 months in prison, again under hate speech and incitement charges. This was a landmark ruling. While Paludan defended his actions as a test of Sweden's commitment to free expression, the court determined that the intent and impact of his actions were targeted hostility toward Muslims as a group. Together, these cases illustrate Sweden's ongoing struggle to define the boundaries of free expression. Is burning a Quran an act of political critique, or is it a direct attack on Muslims as individuals? Where should the line be drawn between protecting democracy and preventing hate? Swedish courts have attempted to refine this distinction, but every verdict has triggered new debates, both domestically and internationally. The fallout from Quran burning incidents has not been limited to courtrooms and protests. They have also shaped Sweden's national security landscape. After a series of demonstrations in 2023, Sweden's domestic security agency, SAPO, raised the terror threat level, citing increased risks of extremist retaliation. Sweden, for the first time in decades, became a high-profile target in jihadist propaganda, with extremist groups using Quran burnings as evidence of Western hostility toward Islam. Swedish officials warned that individuals or groups could attempt attacks either domestically or abroad against Swedish interests. Internationally, Sweden faced deteriorating relations with several Muslim-majority countries. Turkey, already blocking Sweden's NATO accession bid, cited Quran burnings as further justification for its delay, making the issue not just a cultural controversy, but also a geopolitical stumbling block. Sweden suddenly found itself balancing free speech at home with diplomatic fallout abroad. By May 2025, SAPO lowered the threat level back to elevated, signaling that the immediate danger of retaliatory attacks had diminished. However, the agency warned that acts of Quran desecration would likely continue to be exploited by extremist groups as propaganda tools. This means that the security risks are cyclical, rising sharply after each provocative incident, then gradually receding but never disappearing entirely. In response to the wave of incidents and the mounting pressure on the government, Swedish authorities introduced a more comprehensive policy framework. On December 12, 2024, the government unveiled its action plan to combat racism and hate crime. This was not simply a general statement of intent, but a detailed roadmap with measures targeting multiple sectors: education, law enforcement, the labor market, and social welfare. Crucially, the plan explicitly named anti-Muslim racism as one of the key issues to be tackled, alongside anti-Semitism, anti-Black racism, and discrimination against the indigenous Sami community. The plan included commitments to strengthen hate crime units within the police, to increase resources for schools to address prejudice early, and to improve monitoring systems. The Living History Forum, a government agency focused on human rights education, was tasked with providing annual reviews to track progress. The Swedish government framed the initiative as a recognition that racism and religious hatred are not isolated incidents, but structural challenges requiring systemic solutions. For Sweden's Muslim community, these controversies have left lasting marks. Surveys and community reports indicate that discrimination and prejudice remain common in everyday life. Muslims frequently report being subjected to stereotyping, verbal harassment, or even physical intimidation. In workplaces, subtle forms of exclusion, such as being overlooked for promotions or questioned about religious practices, remain challenges. Young Muslims, especially in schools, face particular struggles. Wearing a hijab, requesting halal food, or fasting during Ramadan can make them stand out, sometimes leading to bullying or social isolation. The public association of Islam with extremism or migration problems adds to these difficulties, placing Muslim youth in a constant struggle to balance their religious and national identities. These tensions have sparked protests and collective mobilization. In Stockholm and other cities, demonstrations have drawn hundreds of participants demanding that Quran burnings be banned outright, or that permits for such acts be denied. Protesters have described the acts not as mere free speech, but as deliberate Islamophobic provocations. While authorities remain cautious about limiting demonstrations, the protests highlight growing frustration within Muslim communities who feel that their faith is uniquely targeted in Swedish society. The controversies surrounding Quran desecration, the resulting security threats, and the government's responses have positioned Sweden at a historic crossroads. The nation must navigate its identity as a global defender of free speech while addressing the lived reality of its Muslim minority, who increasingly view themselves as under attack. Court rulings, government policies, and community protests all show that this debate is not only about law, but also about the very soul of Swedish democracy, how to uphold universal rights while ensuring dignity and safety for all citizens. The resolution of this conflict will not come quickly, yet the way Sweden continues to manage these issues in its courts, its streets, and its policies will shape the country's social fabric, its international reputation, and the place of Muslims within Swedish society for decades to come. Sweden's domestic controversies over Quran burnings have never remained confined within its borders. In fact, these incidents have often reverberated far louder abroad than they did at home, transforming what might otherwise have been fringe acts of provocation into diplomatic flashpoints with global consequences. When right-wing activists staged Quran-burning protests in Sweden, whether in Stockholm, Malmö, or smaller cities, the images spread almost instantly across international media and social networks. In Baghdad, angry demonstrators stormed the outer perimeter of the Swedish embassy in 2023 after a high-profile burning. Similar protests erupted in Iran, Pakistan, Turkey, and across the wider Muslim world. For many Muslims abroad, the desecration of their sacred text was seen not as the act of an isolated extremist, but as a failure of the Swedish state to protect religious dignity. Governments reacted with diplomatic weight. Iraq expelled the Swedish ambassador and suspended business ties temporarily. Turkey, already holding leverage over Sweden's bid to join NATO, publicly used Quran-burning incidents as a reason to delay ratification, further complicating Sweden's path to membership. In several countries, Swedish goods and businesses faced calls for boycotts, while Swedish diplomats were summoned to explain their government's stance. The Swedish government, for its part, repeatedly stressed that its broad constitutional protections for freedom of expression make it difficult to ban provocative demonstrations. Yet officials also emphasize that burning a Quran does not represent the Swedish state and does not reflect its values. This careful balancing act, defending free speech while condemning religious hatred, has become a recurring theme in Sweden's diplomatic messaging. At the same time, Sweden's legal system has shown that free expression has limits when it crosses into hate speech or incitement. Swedish courts have ruled in several cases that Quran burnings, depending on context and intent, may fall under agitation against an ethnic or national group, effectively categorizing them as hate crimes. But for many observers abroad, these rulings came too late to counter the perception that Sweden was a permissive environment for Islamophobia. As a result, Sweden's image has shifted. Long seen as a champion of humanitarianism and tolerance, it is now often at the center of Muslim-majority countries' criticism. The controversy illustrates the diplomatic gamble of Swedish free speech. While highly valued at home, it can carry severe costs in international relations. The other major axis of Sweden's engagement with the Muslim world lies not in controversy, but in diplomacy. On October 30, 2014, Sweden made history as the first European Union member state to officially recognize Palestine as a sovereign nation. The decision was spearheaded by the Social Democratic Green Coalition government, which argued that Palestine met the basic criteria of statehood under international law. a defined territory, a permanent population, and a functioning, if limited, government. This recognition was more than symbolic. It marked Sweden as a country willing to diverge from many of its European peers in pursuit of what it framed as international justice and human rights. Palestinian leaders welcomed the move as a breakthrough in their struggle for global legitimacy. Sweden's recognition also gave momentum to debates within other European states, including Ireland, Spain, and Belgium, where discussions about following Sweden's lead intensified. The decision, however, strained Sweden's ties with Israel and its allies. Israel condemned the recognition as premature and counterproductive, recalling its ambassador from Stockholm for consultations. The United States and several EU members, while not openly hostile, expressed unease that Sweden's move might undermine the fragile dynamics of the peace process. Yet, in the years since, the recognition has remained a cornerstone of Sweden's foreign policy identity. It reinforced the country's reputation as a moral actor in international relations, willing to prioritize human rights norms over political convenience. For many in the Arab world, Sweden's recognition of Palestine softened some of the anger generated by Quran-burning incidents, reminding them that Sweden's policies cannot be reduced to the actions of individual extremists. By 2025, Sweden's stance continues to echo in diplomatic circles. Several European parliaments have passed non-binding resolutions urging their governments to recognize Palestine, and in May 2024, Norway, Ireland, and Spain officially joined Sweden in extending recognition. This gradual shift suggests that Sweden's once isolated decision helped pave the way for a broader European rethinking of the Israeli-Palestinian question. Taken together, these two strands, the fallout from Quran burnings and the recognition of Palestine, capture the dual nature of Sweden's international role. On the one hand, it faces harsh criticism for allowing acts that Muslims worldwide view as intolerable provocations. On the other, it has earned respect for bold diplomatic moves in support of Palestinian statehood and the principles of international law. Sweden today finds itself performing a delicate balancing act, defending its liberal democratic traditions while engaging diplomatically with a world where religious sensitivities and geopolitical conflicts remain deeply intertwined. This balancing act is not always successful, and it has sometimes left Sweden isolated. Yet it also underscores Sweden's unique position in global politics as a small Nordic nation whose domestic debates ripple far beyond its borders, shaping conversations about freedom, faith, and justice on the world stage. Sweden today is home to a population of roughly 10 to 11 million people, placing it among the smaller European nations in demographic size. Yet within this modest population, the Muslim community has grown into a significant presence. Estimates suggest that between 8 and 12% of Sweden's residents are Muslim, depending on the methodology used. This makes Islam one of the most visible and influential minority religions in the country, despite the fact that Sweden does not conduct official censuses based on religion. The growing visibility of Islam has coincided with new national strategies aimed at tackling racism and religiously motivated hate crimes. In December 2024, the Swedish government announced a national action plan against racism and hate crimes, with a particular focus on combating anti-Muslim racism and other forms of religious discrimination. This plan is not only symbolic, but also operational, as it allocates resources to education, law enforcement training, and victim support systems. Legal proceedings related to high-profile Quran burnings have also shaped Sweden's contemporary social climate. In 2023, activist Salwan Najam was convicted and fined for multiple Quran burning incidents. The rulings underscored that while Sweden protects freedom of speech, actions deemed to incite hatred against religious groups can fall under penal or administrative law. This delicate balance between free expression and protection from hate speech remains at the center of Sweden's legal and political debate. Another case drew even more dramatic attention. Salwan Momika, who gained notoriety for staging Quran burnings in 2023, was shot dead in January 2025. The killing sparked immediate speculation about motive and accountability. 5 individuals were initially detained in connection with the case but were later released, as investigations are still ongoing. The case continues to attract both domestic and international scrutiny, symbolizing the volatile intersections of activism, religion, and violence in Sweden's public discourse. Meanwhile, Sweden's internal security climate has shifted in measurable ways. In May 2025, the Swedish security service, known as SAPO, officially lowered the national terrorism threat level from high back to elevated. This marked a return to the status quo before the Quran burning events of 2023, when fears of retaliatory attacks and violent extremism had spiked. The downgrade indicates that while concerns remain, authorities perceive a reduced likelihood of imminent large-scale attacks. Looking ahead, Sweden faces both challenges and opportunities as it seeks to reconcile freedom of expression with the protection of religious communities. Several possible directions and hopes emerge from current trends. One of the most pressing needs is the development of clearer legislation that distinguishes between freedom of speech and acts of religious hate speech. The debate over Quran burnings and other provocative demonstrations has revealed legal ambiguities that fuel both domestic division and international outrage. While Sweden's constitution strongly protects expression, many observers argue that deliberate desecration of holy scriptures falls into the category of incitement to hatred. The government has already begun addressing this through its National Action Plan Against Racism and Hate Crimes, launched in December 2024, which identifies anti-Muslim racism as a key priority. Beyond the legal arena, education is expected to play a central role. Schools, civil society, and the media all carry the responsibility of shaping understanding around the consequences of religious intolerance. The desecration of sacred texts is not merely symbolic. It creates real wounds, fuels social divisions, and even sparks diplomatic crises abroad. Future strategies will likely involve strengthening curricula on interfaith history, tolerance, and dialogue programs, helping young Swedes grow up with a deeper appreciation of cultural and religious diversity. A forward-looking strategy must also prioritize the integration and protection of Muslim communities. This includes ensuring access to education, employment, and social opportunities for immigrants and second-generation Muslims. Equally important is the guarantee of religious freedoms. The right to wear symbols of faith such as the hijab, the availability of safe spaces for worship, and the ability of Muslim organizations to hold community events without fear of harassment. These indicators will shape how minorities perceive their belonging within Swedish society. On the international stage, Sweden's future credibility will be measured by its ability to balance domestic freedoms with global responsibility. The 2014 recognition of Palestine positioned Sweden as a European leader in advocating for justice and international law. Similarly, how Sweden manages ongoing controversies over free speech and religious respect could determine whether it is seen as a responsible diplomatic actor. The country has an opportunity to become a model for Europe in crafting policies that combine human rights, social responsibility, and global solidarity. Finally, long-term success will require transparent monitoring and accountability mechanisms. Sweden's national plan already outlines an annual monitoring system for tracking hate crimes and discrimination, with measurable indicators such as reported cases, legal outcomes, and public attitudes. This data will be critical in evaluating whether policies are making tangible differences. If progress can be tracked and communicated clearly, it will strengthen trust not only among domestic communities, but also in Sweden's international standing. Islam in Sweden is not merely about the growth of a population or the construction of new mosques. It also reflects the deeper tensions and possibilities of modern democracy. How a nation that fiercely protects freedom of expression can also uphold respect for religion. How religious and national identities can coexist, overlap, and sometimes collide. And how foreign policy decisions often mirror domestic values. Sweden's recognition of Palestine in 2014, along with its more recent national policies against racism and hate crimes, places the country at a critical crossroads between moral courage on the one hand and the urgent need to maintain social cohesion in an increasingly pluralistic society on the other. The aftermath of Quran burnings, courtroom trials over acts deemed religious insults, the responses of Muslim communities, and the government's regulatory efforts all highlight how fragile this balance truly is. The future will test whether Sweden can become a European model for inclusive diversity. A society where Muslims can practice their faith freely, carry an identity that is socially recognized, and be respected in public life without fear of discrimination or provocation. Achieving that vision depends on concrete steps: fair legislation, inclusive education, open dialogue, and the political will to protect diversity without silencing freedom. If Sweden can navigate this path, it will not only strengthen its own democracy, but also offer a blueprint for nations across Europe and beyond, showing that freedom and faith can coexist in mutual respect. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope it was useful. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.